Hello and welcome to Love Work Life Training Academy. This week we're looking at CVs. So as people start loading in, because again it's a reasonably busy webinar, this one, if you can please drop a note into the chat room or the question and answer box to say that you can hear me, that'd be very much appreciated. This is a very interesting course. This course was requested by one of last week's participants or attendees. They dropped me an email and said, could you do part of this course? Which I obviously said, yes, let's have a look at what you're looking for, and then came back to them with that sort of a scenario of what we think we could deliver. What's always interesting is when we talk about CVs and writing job adverts. When I've run these as a recruiter, as I've run these as sales managers and directors for people, what I've always found is that these are one of the lowest attended courses, and I don't know why. Because when I dig into the data and I start to look at what recruiters do, and I look back at where things go wrong, generally it starts with the job specification. But once you have a good job specification, it's finding the right candidate and presenting that candidate to the client, i.e. the candidate CV, irrespective of that CV is a verbal CV, a paper CV, an electronic CV, or now a video CV. Presenting that candidate to the client is massively important. But obviously to attract the right type of candidates, you have to write a really good job advert to get the right candidates. But it's not just about writing a job advert, it's about so much more. And what's interesting is that when I've gone back, I've looked at consultants that have got lots of jobs on and lots of candidates and they have a low placement ratio. I look at candidates that have consultants that have worked exclusively on the development of their job specification, which we've done in the past, but also the development of their CV skills, presenting a CV skills, and their writing adverts. What I've found is that they've got a higher candidate to placement ratio than anybody else. So what it says is that if we concentrate on the core basics and do the core basics, what we will find is that we will get a far better candidate. Weekly, I normally start these webinars with just a bit of a shout out who's there. Well, this week I'm just going to give you a quick stat just to say how popular and say a thank you to everybody. This week we've just passed the 1,300 individual people logging onto these webinars. So that's an awesome amount of people over the last 20 weeks. So I'd like to thank you all for that. And then say, welcome to next week's webinar. Let's keep running them and let's keep pushing them. So let's kick off and let's really kick off and look at the first thing. And people sort of ask me why I always kick off with writing the CV rather than writing the job advert, because the CV has a special thing. And before we start to write a job advert, we have to understand what type of candidate we actually want. And when we start to look at what type of candidate we actually want, what we need to start to look at is the job specification. And from the job specification, we can start to identify the type of candidate we want. And that's really important, to identify the type of candidate that we want, because if we can do that, then we can start to create the CV that will create interest and desire within the client, but also we can start to create an advert that will create interest and desire in our candidate database. So we've got to make sure that we have both. So I always start with the CV, and I start with what the CV should truly look like. So the objectives of the course today are very straightforward. The objectives are, we're going to look for what makes a good candidate, okay? What makes a good CV, what makes a bad CV, matching the CV to the job specification, making that CV come to life. What next for the CV? What else can you use a CV for? And then we move on to the job side of it, writing a job advert, candidate attraction, your advert layout, content, and making your advert come to light. And then obviously we'll give the normal quick conclusion of what we go from there. So what does a good candidate look like? And it's very simple. Very simple. You've taken the perfect job specification and you are building your niche market of passive candidates and building a good candidate pool. But what are you actually looking for? What do you really want? And this is where we start to match the job spec to the CV before we start going out to candidates. So when I start to think about what type of CV I want to get, I start to look at what is a reasonable match for my needs. So when I start searching and start to looking to include the people I want to exclude, as well as the people I want to include. And you need to create a reasonable size search, because then you can narrow it down. What a lot of agencies do is they want to do a really precise search. And if you haven't got the precise job specification that you require, you've been lazy and you haven't upgraded your job specification for what the client gave you, then guess what? You're never going to find the right person. It's going to be by luck rather than design. The other thing that I always think about on CVs is that candidates are generally very poor at writing CVs, and we're the specialists. So you tend to find that sometimes candidates have put a different terminology for something that you're looking for on a CV. So I always think, widen your spec, or widen your search spec by looking at what type of CVs that you want. You can then start to narrow down to find the right candidate. So it takes a little bit more work, but it means you cover more ground. You find a better quality candidate. You find more candidates quickly. So start to think about what you want to include, not the people you want to exclude. And that's a very different thing. And remember, lots of candidates don't update their CV for quite some time, especially in the passive marketplace. So they could have had a skill on there that might be attached to the skill that you want, but they haven't updated their CV. So you've got to think about, do you include those people or not? You want to look at skills match for potentially could meet your needs. So skills match, you're looking for specific skills, or skills the candidate has used, as I said, in the past, and that you know has a high chance of leading to the skill that you desire. Sometimes when we start that headhunting process, and we're headhunting for really hard to find candidates, it's not just about looking for the skills, it's about thinking outside the box. So when we start to think about this on a CV point of view, let's start to think about skills that the client might be interested in. So the skill might be an old skill, but the client might still be using those type of skills, even though they're looking for the new advancement of that skill, because the bedrock of the skills that they have is based in the old core. So we want to start to think about, what are we looking for and why we're looking for it in that way. I want to look at competitor clients. I want to search for clients that have skills you need. You might find candidates who are there but haven't updated your CV, their CV, sorry. So we need to start to really think about competitor clients. Which clients have a similar skill set? And remember, you have to think outside the box for this. It isn't always about the industry that you're in. It's about the skill set that the candidates are going to be using on those client sites. And to give you a live example from, say, a tech point of view, Rankovis, who make bread and flour, etc., biscuits, they use the very same skill set that AstraZeneca use. AstraZeneca produces chemicals and fertilizers, etc. But their systems are exactly the same. So I would always search for people in Astra and people in Rankovis if I was recruiting for one of them, because I wanted to find out what they're doing. So I always look for competitor clients. Remember, it's not always a type of competitor that you expect. It's not the direct competitors that sometimes have the right skill set. It's other ones. You need to look for industry matches. Look for industries that use the skills that you require. And then look at companies within those industries. Because what we're doing, we're looking for good candidates. But what we're actually doing when we're looking for candidates, we're looking to widen our candidate database. Where else can we find quality? But also we're looking to widen our client database. Who else could I place these candidates at? So I always think about my candidates when I pull a candidate on. I think instantly, can they and will they do the job? So I'm starting to look at their skill set. Can they do the job? Will they is going to have to be a question when I speak to them. And then start to look at what they're doing from an industry point of view. Will my client be interested in seeing them? What will they be looking at? Will they match? So I also want to look at that. I want to really drive myself into looking at those candidates in that way, because I want to be able to drive desire for both my candidate and my client market. So if I'm building a candidate market, I can then build a client market. So the last thing I always think is, can I put this candidate elsewhere? If so, where? So every candidate I find, looking at their CV, I'm looking for new clients. For every candidate I have, I look at, can I put them into this new client, and vice versa, can I put my candidate into another client? So I'm looking for specific knowledge and qualifications, looking for niche things that set my candidate apart. And once I start to look at that, this is what starts to make a really good candidate for me. So rather than narrowing my search and discarding quite a lot of the marketplace, as I said right at the start, I widen my search and then go narrow, because I want to find candidates that may not be able to write for this job, but will be able to help me build my marketplace, help me lead to better candidates, help me lead to better clients. So I want to know all of these things constantly. I then start to look, very simply, what makes a good CV? And this is where average and poor consultants start to slack, start to disappear. I want to find a good skills match, but that good skills match is only based on the skills that I have. So if I've been an average and poor consultant and I've taken a poor job spec, guess what? I'm only going to get the skills on my job spec. So I'm going to get a candidate that might not be right for the job or fully right for the job. So do the skills on the CV match the skills that my clients needs? Do the skills on the CV link potentially to the skills you need or to other candidates who might have the skills? So a good skills match is instantly something that I start to look for. I want to look for specific skills, technology, and industry knowledge. Does the candidate or does the client have or had a specific technology or work in a specific area that you or your client is searching for? Remember, just because it's not on the CV doesn't mean to say that the candidate doesn't have that skill set or that industry knowledge. So even if they have skills that link to them, I want to be talking to this candidate constantly. And once I can see those on the CV, it's then about how I expand that CV to create interest and desire with our clients. Tenure and career progression. Certainly in the permanent market, I'm always looking for tenure and career progression. A CV with good tenure at a client shows a great career progression and shows a sign of loyalty and drive. However, please bear in mind that long tenure without progression might mean the candidate is a plodder, but still potentially useful. When we start to think about that from a temp side, temps who have been extended, temps who have been given a longer contract, temps that have been there for quite a long time are things that we need to be looking for. Temps who have a short tenure, okay, we need to think about what we're going to do with that. I always look for a CV, and whilst I'm looking on that CV, there's one thing I'm looking for constantly. I'm looking for no gaps on the CV. When I say no gaps, I am looking for dates that match. I don't want to see someone who's put January to February, because I don't know if that's January 2001 to February 2020. I want to see exact dates, where they start, where they finish. And I want to see the gaps between the end date of one position and the start date of another. The longer the gap, then I need to investigate why that gap is. And it's interesting when you start to investigate some of the gaps, you start to get a more insight into the candidate and what's going on with the candidate. So always look for that. If you have gaps, let's cover it, okay? And make sure we understand what that gap is. And I'm going to cover that a little bit later on so we understand what we're looking for when we look at gaps. I want qualifications and accreditations. Certainly if I am looking at a permanent person, but even on temps and contract work, someone who's got a good accreditation or a good qualification is always a good person to put forward. But remember, it's not always an indication of ability or an indication of someone's willingness to improve their status. What it just shows is they have been competent enough to get a qualification, but that qualification might drive that interest and desire of the client to see that candidate. So we think about it in that ways. If I find a candidate with a good qualification and accreditation, I still want to investigate them and find out how competent they are, so I can make sure that that is highlighted in their CV. Industry specifics. Okay. Again, looking for industry-specific candidates with a small sampling of skills that you require could lead to the right type of candidates that you need. So remember, every candidate you speak to, it's not just that candidate we're talking to, it's who else do they know, and who else do they know after that, and who else do they know after that. So I keep working on that constantly to make sure that my CV, when I put that candidate forward, has the right industry specific skill needs and the right technical skill needs, as well as the behavioral side as well. The final thing, what makes a good CV, is a CV that is just simple and easy to read. And this is where a lot of recruiters go wrong. A lot of recruiters are just lazy and will submit the candidate CV to the client. The client might then spend quite some time trying to find the candidate's interest in the job because they can't match the skills, because they can't see the skills in the CV, because the candidate's told you they have them but hasn't highlighted them in the CV, and you've been too lazy to actually identify them. So the old-fashioned way of recruitment was to write a really good opening paragraph for the client, highlighting in the CV where the candidate has those type of skills. So it means the client can instantly go to certain parts of the CV and identify exactly what drives their desire and will hope to increase their interest and want to interview this candidate. So where there's good things, the layout is important. And I see lots of people who have fancy layouts, etc., etc. What you've got to think about is when you send these type of CVs across, depending on what version or what application the person is opening that CV in, and that includes video, will depend what the layout comes out like. So the more complex the layout, the more likelihood it is to be a mismatch on technical skills, etc., which then makes the CV look poor. And I always want to add to a CV references. References are really important. If I have a candidate CV with references on, it starts to tell the client that this candidate is A, serious about the job, but B, is willing to back up the claims that you've made on the CV with good references. So CVs without references lack that instant credibility. CV with references increase the credibility of your candidate. So what makes a bad CV? When we start to put a CV under the microscope, we've got to really sort of think about this in a very, very simple way. They don't match your needs or your needs right now. So yes, there are bad CVs, but you need to remember what is one person's food is another person's poison. So it might be a bad CV for your current client that you're recruiting for, but can you place that candidate elsewhere? Will that CV match your client skills elsewhere? So yes, there are bad CVs, but yes, there are bad CVs that are bad for one client but good for another. So just because the CV doesn't match your skill set doesn't mean to say we can't use it. It also means that each CV you review and the candidate you speak with is a lead generation opportunity which cannot and shouldn't be wasted. Therefore, every CV is valuable. But when we look at what makes a bad CV, the first thing I look at is tenure. If the tenure is short, I want to check the reasons why, whether it be a perm job, whether it be a temp job, whether it be a contract job, I want to understand why. You need to be able to distinguish between them. You want to become, or you don't want to become, should I say, the patron saint of lost causes and just putting CVs forward for the sake of putting CVs forward. If the CV candidate has a short tenure, dig into that tenure. If they're not willing to talk to you about that tenure or not willing to talk to you about that client, you should start to think of smell a rat really, and start to think there's something wrong here, and start to think whether or not you should really putting that CV forward or not. There's lots of CVs I see that do not have anywhere near enough information. But not everyone is great at writing CVs. So I said before, sometimes a bad CV is not the fact that it lacks the information, it actually lacks the quality, or it lacks the candidate's capability of actually building a CV. So you've got to go back to basics and look at what you're searching for and think, have I attracted the right candidate? If I have, now can I build the CV? Again, I've had this conversation with lots of candidates. I am not changing my CV, is the usual comment when I ask to change a CV. I want you to rewrite it in this style. I'm not rewriting it in that style. My CV is good enough to be put forward. And I will turn around and quite say, Mr. Candidate or Miss Candidate or Mrs. Candidate, you are the expert in your market, and nor would I ever argue about your expertise within your market. However, I'm the expert within recruitment, and I am telling you now, if I put your CV forward to my client, the client will not grant you an interview. The CV is there to attract the client and create desire and interest in the client to interview you. This CV will not create that. Therefore, I am not putting your CV forward. You have the right to push back. So push back if there's not enough information that will attract the client's interest and prick their desire to actually want to interview this person. Again, quite often I see no skills highlighted at all, because sometimes candidates are very blasé about what they are putting on a CV and think that everybody knows, because they work at a certain client or a certain company, that they'll have a certain skill set. Well, that's not true. We don't all know that, and nor should we. So we can't assume. If there are no skills there or highlighted, let's find those skills and let's highlight those skills. Because remember, it's the skills and what the candidate has done with the skills and the results that the candidate has got from those skills that we need to use when writing a CV. One of my pet hates, a CV written in the third person. Simply do not do it. It is a shocking way to present a candidate. It is not a great way to present a candidate at all. It shows lack of interest, shows lack of capability. Too many non-standard abbreviations. Remember, abbreviations are within your company. What we call a job spec, someone might call a job specification. Someone might call it a job order, etc. Some might call it a JD. Someone might call it a JS. So standard abbreviations aren't good, because they maybe not be standard right across the industry, only in that company. So if you have abbreviations, make sure you understand what they are and write them out in full. Now, I am proudly to admit it, I am hugely dyslexic. So grammar is a problem with me. So I always get people to check the CVs before I send them over to make sure the grammar is correct. I always make sure when I'm looking at a candidate's CV that the grammar is correct. And I will talk about a candidate about what that actually means, because it might be that they too might be dyslexic. There may be a reason why their grammar is poor. It doesn't indicate that their skills are poor, but it means that some people, when you highlight that on a CV, it does look bad. Too many candidates have hobbies on a CV that just simply are not conducive and simply shouldn't be there. Okay, keep the hobby bit nice and simple. We've talked about poor layout, okay, and what that poor layout actually means and what that actually does. So we need to make sure that we do that, okay. We need to make sure that we look at consistency. And it's the one key thing, the CV needs to be consistent all the way through. And if it's consistent all the way through, then we're going to be in a far better place. So let's look at matching the CV to the job specification. And we're going to start now to sort of venture into both sides of the CV, both paper and video format, okay? A normal paper CV is two-dimensional. It's a document that needs to be made to come alive in order to the client to move the CV onto the next stage, the interview stage. So how do we do that with just a paper CV? How do we do that before we move on to video? How do we make a paper CV really sort of come to life a little bit more than it does? The first thing I look for is I look to mirror and match. If I read the CV, would I be able to know exactly what job that candidate is looking for? So it should absolutely replicate my job order. And I'm constantly saying to clients and consultants, in businesses, if my job spec looks like that, my CV should look like that. So when I put them together, I get a perfect match. If my CV looks like that and my job spec looks like this, then I've got issues. So I need to make sure that my CV matches and mirrors the job spec as humanly possible. I want to increase the desire and the urgency, without lying on the CV, of course, of my client to buy. I want to pick out key areas of interest. And the key areas of interest are always skills, the results they've had from those skills, and their behaviors within the business. So if you're not digging deep enough into your CV, you need to explore why. If it doesn't match your job specification, explore why. Get the candidate to have a look at the job specification and get the candidate to readdress their CV based on the job specification. Once you have their CV back, again, question them on the new areas. It creates trust, it creates urgency, and it creates desire. So mirror and matching CVs is really important. Do not just put the candidate CV across to the client and hope that the client has listened to your conversation with the candidate where they've told you all the good things that you want to hear, but they haven't put it in their CV, because guess what? The client isn't listening. So the client doesn't know that. You have to spell it out to the client. So mirror and match it. The key areas of job specification that should be easily navigatable to. So again, when we talked about writing a summary of the CV, this helps the client to navigate to that. With certain clients, what I used to do, certainly when we went from being faxing CVs to Word, and that was a great opportunity for me, because what I used to do was highlight in yellow all the prevalent areas of the CV that the candidate client wanted to see. So it means the client could easily navigate to the CV straight away. I want the client to think instantly. Interview. The forgotten art of creating interest is in writing that summary. A summary on the CV that guides the client to the areas of most interest in the CV, making the client bypass bits that they might not want to read, which might switch them off. When the client has numerous CVs sat on their desk to review, normally they'll either skim read them or get bored after a couple of CVs and then just start to look at them. So if the skills aren't jumping out and the matches aren't jumping out, then the client might miss them. So make your client's job as easy as possible. But one thing that we must do when we're matching the CV is we mustn't lie. Do not lie on the CV, because guess what? If that CV then gets the interview, that lie is going to be discovered very, very quickly. And it's you that looks stupid. So if you've doctored a CV to try create an interview just to hit a KPI, then the client is going to discover that very, very quickly. So matching your CV to the job specification is really important. So making that CV come to life is what differentiates us from good to great, good to poor, poor to bad. So we should always try and sell the candidate to the client over the phone first and foremost. When submitting a CV, what I tended to do was not just submit the CV to the client, I'd ring the client up and tell them that I was submitting a CV. If the client wasn't available, then I would submit the CV. But what I wanted to get was the client on the phone. So during my job specification stages, I would set times to call the client to actually submit the CVs over the phone, which meant I could talk through the candidate's CV with the client there and then, highlighting what I wanted the client to see to generate the interest and desire required to actually make them want to interview them. I would always write a summary, okay? always write a summary. Okay, it makes you look and sound more professional. I would send references with the client where I had references. Again, it shows genuine interest from the candidate and shows credibility with you. I would now try and get the candidate to create a 2-minute elevator pitch on their smartphone. If I had to send a paper CV and a video CV, then what I might do is send the video CV first, that 2-minute elevator pitch, to prick the client's interest and increase their desire, and then the paper CV. If I videoed the candidate over over Zoom or whatever it be, okay, I might want to send the whole of that video, the whole of that interview, so the client can see that. I might want to snip bits of it so the client can see that. I want to make the candidate come to life in front of the client's eyes. The more I can make the candidate come to life, the more my client is likely to buy them. So, as we move on, okay, what's going to happen to the CV next? Things are changing, okay? CV is very old school. And to some degree, is it necessary or is it not? I still think it is very necessary. But how else can we judge and grade a candidate quickly and easy? Well, that's quite simple nowadays. We start to think presenting a CV to a client during a meeting. I always think if I can take CV, if I'm going to a client meeting, I find out what the client wants by looking at skills that the client is already engaging in candidates. If I have candidates similar to that, then I will take CVs with them of candidates I know are available. I look at my predefined job spec and I search and select the appropriate candidates before the meetings. I will also brief the candidate fully about the client whilst I'm going if the candidate is available. And what I try and do is then make sure that the candidate is available during that meeting so I can have a Skype, a Zoom, interview, Odro, whatever technology I'm using. I could then use that interview technique there with the client if I know my candidate is already there available to speak to. So I present my CV to the client. I inform the client that my candidates are available now for interview via Skype or whatever it be. And therefore, sometimes I can close the meeting with either a deal or a face-to-face meeting or interview. So now having a video CV also becomes a real option to drive into that client and increase desire. However, I've had this conversation with a number of clients about the video CV. Well, I keep getting rejected, and then I go back and argue with the client, and the client's giving me reasons I just didn't like the person. Well, guess what? The client wouldn't like the person if they saw them face to face. There's something about that the client doesn't like. It's human nature. So it saves your client a massive amount of time not interviewing people that they don't want to interview. And we've all sat in that interview where we've been in there for 5 minutes, and after 5 minutes we're thinking, what on earth is this person sat across from me doing here? And yet we carry on that interview. So we've got to think about the clients will do exactly the same. So let's reduce that by producing top video CVs. Sending a copy of the candidate's pre-qualification interview tape, as we said, is also now important because you can cut and paste that tape, okay, and create some really good snippets that will drive the interest and desire of the client to want to interview that candidate. So if we create a CV in those ways, then now we can start to generate true interest and desire for the candidates that we send across, and we can start to increase our CV to interview ratio. And if we have the right job specification and we now have the right CV tool, then guess what? We'll start to increase our interview to placement ratio as well. So it starts to form a line now, and when we start to analyze our business, we can see where we go right and where we go wrong. But what else for the CV? What else can we use the CV for? And I was thinking about the building blocks of what our business is about. And this, again, is something that average and poor recruiters simply do not do. CVs are an opportunity to lead generate. If you sent a CV or it's on a job board, it says they are leaving. Therefore, there's a backfill opportunity straight away with that candidate. Leads from current and past employers are there to be gathered and actually acted on now. But again, too many consultants do not do the backfill, do not think about a backfill. Yes, if they're out of work, there might not be an opportunity. However, they might be out of work because the client just didn't think they were good enough to do the job. So there might be an opportunity. So still ring that client. There is a backfill opportunity there or not. If it's a contractor or a temp, they take contract and temps, therefore call the client. It's a lead generation opportunity. It's also an opportunity to gather references. And I think references are the easiest business development call there is, because taking a reference is not a sales call until you get to the end of that reference and you spin that call. So taking references from a candidate not only makes the candidate look good to the client that you're putting them forward to, it gives you an opportunity to open up a new client or to cement a relationship with a client that you already have, or to build a relationship that you're trying to create with a client that you're potentially starting to work with. It's an opportunity to gather information. And gathering information is really important. The more information that we can give to the client about the candidate, about the marketplace, means the client can spend more time making a proper decision, due diligence, and we can give the information that creates the due diligence that the client requires to make the right decision. As I said right at the beginning, it's about building a passive marketplace, a niche marketplace. Every CV should lead to a minimum of 2 other clients. If you collate the client information and cross-reference it constantly, you'll soon be able to build a client and a candidate marketplace. Again, that's a slightly different course, but we can build a candidate and client marketplace. It means that you can have a candidate that you may be able to put out to multiple clients and get multiple interviews on. It means you'll have clients that you can pull multiple candidates in and get multiple interviews at. So we've got to think about that. So the CV just isn't a simple tool to very quickly flip over to a client. It is the biggest sales tool we have that provides and creates interviews. So irrespective whether it's 2D on paper or 3D on video, it is about selling the candidate to the client constantly. It's not about a tick box exercise, which most recruiters think it is. So, attracting candidates. And this is where we start to get a little bit different. We need to write a job advert that attracts candidates. And what is it? Sales discussions or sales decisions is about writing a good job advert online. An advert is there to catch the eye of the applicant quickly and then sell the role. The aim is to get the best applicants applying. So therefore, we've got to work out what we actually want from our applicants when we start applying this type of information and start writing a job advert. Hence why I said it's important to write a good job advert. It's important to know what type of CV you're looking for in the first place. So when you start to think about a candidate, what is it that's going to catch the candidate's eye and make them want to apply to your job? The first thing a search engine is going to do is going to try and match your candidate search to the keywords in your advert. So you've got to make sure that the keywords in your advert, match what you want. Job boards also use SEO and put your job at the top of the list based on the things that they require or the things that you require. So we've got to make sure that we're doing those type of things constantly. We've got to make sure that the advert is to be seen. Okay? And what that means is that if your SEO isn't good, it's going to be right at the bottom of the list. If your title is not great, then people are going to skip over it. 70% of every advert is now watched or viewed on a mobile phone. So if your advert doesn't attract the attention and grab the desire of the candidate in the first 20 seconds of reading it, guess what? They've skipped over it. So it's there to create interest. It's there to create desire. It's there to create the things that we need to make sure that the advert pushes through. We want to make sure that we have these things because we are building a candidate pool. Hence why I said our advert should be there out to attract a wide number of candidates, and then we narrow in, not go very niche and then work from there. So we've got to make sure we're doing the right things constantly. Now, to build a candidate pool is important, but the elements of the job advert to help you build the candidate pool is even more important. So, first of all, the elements of a job advert. The advert must be easily found and candidates attracted to the job at a glance. To get your application to what you want, you need to include the following factors in your job spec, in your job advert, sorry. So, things that we need to include. I'm having just a little bit of technical difficulties with the internet, I'm afraid, guys. The things that we need to include on our advert are as follows. I'm just having a little bit of technical trouble here. Okay, we need a job title. We need a proper job title. We need a good salary and a good rate. Sorry guys that my system has just closed down for 30 seconds. Let me just open up. I don't know what was going on there, but something was happening. It's always the same when it's hot. There's always a technical issue somewhere. So let me just see if I can get everything back online. So I apologize for the technical issue that we're having. It's always the same. Heat causes all sorts of problems, doesn't it? So just opening back up. Something drastically wrong with the systems, or not drastically wrong with the internet at the moment. It's just absolutely cut off on me and gone very, very slow. Let's just check everything's still running on the internet. So apologies for this, ladies and gentlemen. It's not great. Let me see if I can get things going again relatively quickly. As you can see, it's saying there, advert not responding for some reason. So let me stop sharing. Right, okay, we seem to be coming back to life and back to normality, which is good. It's just not letting me do anything further, which is always great. Right, I think Well, in 2 seconds, we should be back. There we go. We're back. Okay, so apologies for that, ladies and gentlemen. It's always a bit of a worry from my point of view when the system stops working and things start going to awry, although it's still not really playing. Okay, so but when we talk about the elements of the job advert, again, what I was talking about was the job title is really important. We need to make sure that in our job title, we have things such as our salary and rates. We need to make sure that the location is really important because this is what people are going to be searching on more than anything else. We need to make sure the job description is really, really good. And we need to make sure that the motivators to create desire for people to apply are easily seen within the job advert. And obviously, the last thing that we need to make sure is there is our contact details. So the title is more than just a title. The title is really important, okay? It's often the first and only element that has any visual impact on the candidate. So why is the title so important? Because the title is an attention grabber. You want to grab the attention of the person straight away. So it's a strap line, okay? A catchy strap line, okay? So things such as, you know, want to progress yourself, fed up and want to move, are you looking for a change? You know, it needs to ask the applicant something. It needs to grab their attention straight away. So I want to remove any confusion in my strapline, okay? So I put the title of my job, okay, because it's there to grab attention, okay? It needs to be a title that everybody understands and that is common. I want to make sure that they understand what the job is. Lots of clients have some very, very high sort of fancy names for certain jobs. Take it down to what the market calls that job, okay? So we need to make sure that the title isn't confusing, okay? Most titles get the attention of the right candidate if it's the right title. So if you're looking for a systems engineer, call it a systems engineer. If you're looking for a warehouse operative, call it a warehouse operative. Make it the most common. In the title, add the salary and add the rate. Because guess what? Lots of consultants search for the advert by title and by salary. So the first thing that the job boards and what Google does is search for those type of things, then they need to be in your title to grab attention. And guess what? So's location. Location is in there. So if I was looking for an office administrator, it might be office administrator, £24,000 per annum, based in Leeds, would be a good attention grabber because that gets people thinking straight away exactly what the job is and what they require from that job. So I need to make it absolutely as specific as possible to make sure I drive the people to the actual role that I want. The salary on the role is really important. The rate on the role is really important, but never put competitive or negotiable because it means that you don't really know what the salary is. And if you don't know what the salary is, you could get people who are far too qualified or far less qualified from it. So I always make sure I put the right thing. Can search now, one of the popular things they search for is salary, but also with benefits. So we've got to think about what we do with our benefit, okay? Avoid putting things like market rate, excellent rate, negotiable. So we've got to think about what we're writing for our candidates to grab that attention first and foremost. We've got to think about how a job board also searches. State a single location and state it often. State a single job spec, job title, and often to make sure we're doing the right things. So avoid things like multiple locations. Avoid things like Yorkshire or London and Southwest. It's too big an area. We've got to make sure it's more specific than that and write it down. So the job title, although the smallest part of your advert, is very important. The job description. every word counts. On a job board, okay, the first 50 to 60 words of your vacancy description is normally included underneath, especially when you start to read on cell phones, on mobile phones, etc. So ensure that you're enticing your candidate in that first part. So you have your title and then that first 50, 60 words. Make sure that they are the attention-grabbing words that makes the candidate want to read further. Write in ordinary language. And I mean ordinary language. Make it simple and easy to understand. As I say, the quicker that people can understand, the more it is. So in that first part, repeat the job title. Create desire for them to read more. But what else do we need? We need to think about what we're going to put in, okay, after that. So put your most important information at the top of your job descriptions. Candidates won't miss it, and often job boards display the vacancies in their research results, as I've said, in that first 50 words. So if you can put as much as possible in that top part, do so. Simply do not cut and paste the information that your client has sent to you. We need to make sure that we put the right information out in front of our candidate. If we put a client's job specification on there and every other lazy recruiter does the same, guess what? You've got 4 or 5 agencies competing for the same candidate. So if you make your advert stand out and make your advert better, then you'll get candidates who will solely be applying to your advert. So state the top 2 things that you want your candidate doing daily in that first part of the advert. Use words you know your candidate will be using to search on. As I say, do not use the client's job specification because that is lazy. So to make your job specification come to life, or your job advert to come to life, okay, make sure you're advertising your role on the right job board. And that seems so simple, but how many times do I see when I go into consultancy or go into businesses where you're advertising this job, I'm advertising on every single job board. Wow, how expensive is that? How often do you know where your best candidates come from? Because you might not have to advertise that on the job board if you know where your best candidates come from. Just go to that job board's database and search into that database. Look at your own database as well. For an SEO point of view, you need to repeat the job title at least 4 times. And you need to use skills, or it needs to be in plain English. So we need to make sure that we look at, because when a job board ranks your job advert, it will rank it on certain things from an SEO perspective that you need to make sure that are in there. So the title 4 times, the location, the salary, and then the buzzwords that you're looking for will drive your job advert up the SEO chain, and therefore it will get seen by more candidates than before. So tailor your advert, okay, for the job board, following the hints and tips that the job board suggests, and they have all different hints, different tips, and what they do. But repeating the title and keywords to boost your visibility is important. But be careful not to give too much information away, because if you give too much information away, what you're going to find is that the information that you're giving away is going to be, what's the best way of describing it? It's going to be enable a client to identify your specific need, your specific client, okay? Tell the client, or tell the candidate what skills you're looking for, both that are essential, and desirable. Make sure we're doing the right things constantly from there. Make it clear what's in it for the candidate. And that's a really interesting one. Make it clear what's in it for the candidate, and think about how lockdown has changed candidates' desires and needs, okay? They've changed huge, okay? they've changed hugely over the last 146 days, I think it is, since lockdown started. So think what you're putting in there might be desirable. Before lockdown, salary and rate was probably the highest thing. Now it's going to be more about the clients and what the client's done with their other employees during lockdown. Highlight the positive of what the company is offering, and where you can, describe the company's desire without, describe the company to create desire without lying. And the one thing that I always think about when I start to write an advert, and I generally start to think about this, and again, a lot of people sort of think this and don't really pay it enough attention, okay? I always think, plain and simple, read my advert, and then would I apply? Would I apply to my own advert? So I've got to think about, career, training, qualifications, growth, exposure to training, etc. All things that would prick my interest. Are they in my advert? Are they in there? Okay. I also put some screens in to target relevant candidates, but don't leave yourself open to sort of floods of, candidates that can't do the job. Okay. Yes, we want to go wide, but we don't want to go too wide that we get flooded with really poor jobs. Okay, make sure your job advert has a unique reference number, because then you can link that advert into your CRM, and you can use your CRM quite properly for that. Read and check your advert before publishing, making sure it has all the necessary information in, and again, the right contact details are really important. And keep it snappy, keep it brief, keep it interesting. Now, it's a very, very holistic way of writing adverts, but I want you to think about what you're actually doing. You're writing an advert, you're writing something that's going to attract somebody to apply. So this advert isn't just going out onto a job board. This advert should be emailed out to your candidates on your CRM, candidates that you know, to prick their desire instantly. It's not just about a one-way street, putting an advert out and hope CVs come back to you. It's also putting it to candidates that you know to get candidates coming back to you straight away. So a job advert writing isn't just about putting an advert and publishing it on a job board. It's also about attracting candidates from within your own database, candidates from within your own marketplace. Make those job adverts stand out, and if you get them to stand out properly, you'll create more desire and interest from your candidates, and you'll pick up better candidates than your competition. So don't be lazy and do the usual thing and just copy and paste what the client sent to you and think that is sufficient to attract. So to conclude, we know what a good candidate looks like. We know what a good and bad CV looks like. We can match our CV against a job specification, and we can make our CV come to life. And we can present our CV to get a win. And we can generate more business from that CV. We now know how to write an advert that will attract the right CVs to us. And you know how to make that advert come to life. So that's very quickly, ladies and gentlemen, all about how to write a CV and how to write a job advert. I apologize massively for the crash of technology. I've gathered two or three people have emailed in as well and said they've crashed too. So I'm assuming that something's going on somewhere, more than likely with the heat. From there, if anyone's got any questions, feel free to drop some questions in the chat room. If anyone wants to speak to me about this, feel free to give me a call. As I said right at the beginning, okay, I'd like to thank everybody that's attended our webinars. We are still running them, okay, and we'll continue to run them for quite some time. We have now passed over 1,300 people that have attended these. So if you're enjoying them, thank you very much. If you've no more questions, I look forward to speaking to you all next week. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Love Work Life Training Academy. Thank you very much. Enjoy the heat.